Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are in my living room one more time. I did get everything off of my foot, but I haven't quite figured out how to walk yet. So a little bit of more work, and hopefully the next time that I meet with you, I will be in the more formal setting of my office. Anyway, for now, this is what we're stuck with, and I didn't want to make you wait any longer for some kind of video from me, some type of explanation. Some of you, only like two of you, have asked me about the readings, and so I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about them, which is why I promised this video today. I'm going to first talk about what you read this past week, which would be, the Encomium on Helen and Against the Sophist and Antidosis. So we're looking at Gorgias and Isocrates as the authors, the theorists, this week. And then I'm going to preview next week, which is interesting because I didn't realize I had assigned Phaedrus and Rhetoric together, but I did. And actually, that's not a horrible thing. They're completely different styles of writing. Phaedrus is a play, essentially. It's a dialogue between a couple of people, and I'll talk about that. And also Rhetoric then is completely different. Rhetoric is sort of a categorical or topical organized, the handbook of rhetoric is kind of what we call it. So while it may not necessarily give you all the skills that you need, he lays the framework, or the groundwork, I should say. He lays the groundwork for what Cicero is going to do for us in a couple of weeks. So let's get started. First, Rhetoric, of course, started out as an oral tradition. Most people did not think about or write about or give us any record of talking about rhetoric prior to really Gorgias. There are some things that have been recorded throughout history that can be considered sort of rhetorical devices or rules for rhetoric. One of them that I'm thinking of, and I mispronounce this every single time, so please forgive me, but I believe that it was an ancient pharaoh named Temutep, I think is the name. I'm not positive on that, but the story goes that he said, if you or a person would rather be heard and denied than to not be heard at all. And that is sort of the first rule of the way that we're supposed to approach rhetoric with an ethic, right? It's not shut up, canceled, I don't want to listen to you, I'm blocking you on Twitter or whatever. That's not the way it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be that we're open and willing to listen to, or we're open and willing to speak when it is justified to do so. And even if we get denied, or even if we need to deny somebody a request that they're trying to persuade us with, that's okay. That's still better than ignoring someone. And if you've ever been in a situation, even in an interpersonal situation where you have tried to tell somebody something, usually it's like, I'm sorry, or it's a let's work this out sort of thing. And you're like, I'm avoiding this conversation to no end. That denial of allowing them to tell you something is worse. It's worse to be like denied the opportunity to speak, to be ignored, than if you say, all right, I'll hear you out, and then you still say, sorry, not buying it. Most people just don't want to engage that way. And anymore, what we're seeing is that people either engage because they agree, like in our own little bubble worlds, we all agree, right? We surround ourselves with people who we generally agree with. And nobody wants to do the work of listening to someone that they know they're most likely to disagree with. No one wants to do that, which is interesting because as a person who studies political communication, it's been really difficult. It used to be that we could watch Joe Biden's speeches or his press conferences, and we might say, okay, well, I generally agree with what Joe Biden says, but what he said about, Afghanistan was not what I wanted to hear. I would have preferred to hear something else. Or I wish he had done a different policy, like a different pullout of Afghanistan, whatever it is. We can disagree with it. That does not mean that we want to, force him out of office. Okay. We don't go to those extremes. That's not where you go. Um, not a lot of us spent a whole lot of time. I don't even know if you guys were old enough to vote for in 2016, but if you were, we didn't spend a whole lot of time. Like if you voted for Hillary, you didn't spend a lot of time going around saying we need to overturn this election because Donald Trump didn't really win. That's not at all what happened. Instead, people had the old same complaint. Man alive, that stupid electoral college screwed us again. And legit, right? Like, so I would say to people all the time, like legitimately, Donald Trump is our president. We need to listen to what he has to say, whether we want to or not. We have to, even if it's to evaluate it to say that's crap. I'm going to ignore that. But he is the one of the three heads of government. So it's important that we pay attention to what he has to say. Same thing now, people saying, oh, I'm being canceled. You're not being canceled. You're being told that you're disagreed with and you don't like it. So you, I don't know, pull a Piers Morgan and run off of the stage in the middle of a TV show, or Sidney Powell, and you stop an interview because someone's saying something that you don't like. Or I think Donald Trump actually did that to George Stephanopoulos or Brian Williams, or I don't remember who he did it to in the actual Oval Office when they did an interview once. I don't think it was George Stephanopoulos, but I don't remember who it was. And he just did not like the questions being asked, so he just kicked the guy out of the office, said, we're not doing this. And this was not some, newbie little leaguer. This was somebody from, I believe it was CNN. So the concept of having to listen to things you don't want to listen to is as old as humans. Ever since we started thinking about this, ever since language became developed, that's what we've thought of is, I want to get my thoughts out, and I'm not really concerned with what other people have to say. Now, if you go back and look at the Code of Hammurabi, but you haven't heard that in a while, some of you are probably like, what? The Code of Hammurabi is one of the first sets of rules that we have, and it's from ancient Egypt. And in that code, it has things like you shouldn't murder other people. I mean, real basic rules for engagement, right? Sort of a social contract that had to be written out. And in there, they talk about, it's a little bit about making sure that, everyone is treated the way that we would want to be treated, which is, follows through ancient Greece, as we're going to see, follows through Rome, follows through Christianity, follows through a lot of different religions, a lot of different faiths, a lot of different practices. Even my husband, who claims to be completely areligious, believes that he's sort of a deist, I guess, like that somebody set something in motion and they're watching, but they don't involve themselves with it. Even he believes that there's got to be some code to keep balance in the universe. And so I was raised Catholic, so we have strict rules about, saying God bless you after somebody sneezes, otherwise we're going to hell, things like that. And if you're Catholic, you understand that there's a reason why movies that criticize, or TV shows or news that criticizes the Pope and the Catholic Church, is that they're too dogmatic. They just hand down decisions and we're supposed to follow them. This has actually led to a big controversy with President Biden. And the way that happened is that President Biden is Catholic. And in the Catholic Church, and I say church, not faith, in the Catholic Church, Christianity is a faith, they tell you that abortion is wrong and you should do everything you can to protect an unborn child. But Biden came out and said, listen, I am going to do everything I can to fight this law in Texas that completely bans all abortions, that the Supreme Court tried to which it upheld overnight. I'm going to do everything I can to fight it. He can't single-handedly just overturn the decision, but he can say that he's going to fight it. And people are like, but that goes against your Catholic faith. And he's kind of like, don't talk to me about my faith. There's a huge difference between religious dogma and the humanity that we might feel when we're trying to participate in a process that allows everybody to have a voice. One of my friends is a gynecologist. Actually, she's an OBGYN. She's also the dean of the medical school down in Florida. And she actually posted something which is rare on Facebook. She rarely does that. But it was, they will jail women who get abortions or attempt to get abortions, but there's nothing in there about jailing the father. And she was really having a hard time with that one. And, this is an OBGYN who was raised Catholic. She and I went to school together, first through 8th grade, and we went to a Catholic school, and, she went to my church. And I'm proud of her for, yeah, you can still have faith in something and still know that science is important, right? So that's sort of what Biden's trying to say. But it's a very, very difficult political line to walk. And that's why rhetoric is so often associated with the political, because as we're going to hear from Aristotle next week, that's usually where rhetoric lives, is in the realm of the political, in mass influence, when you're trying to persuade large groups of people, whole countries or the world, when you're trying to persuade them of something, and the people who participate in that. And in order to function properly, we have to first listen. So Jen Psaki, who is the press secretary for President Biden, sort of got, well, she's hilarious, I mean, in some ways, but she's dead serious and dead right on other things. For example, that is not a question that is appropriate to ask. How does this jive with your religious faith? I mean, did anybody ever ask Donald Trump, how does this policy jive with your religious faith? I don't recall that happening. I know for a fact nobody asked Bill Clinton. They asked Hillary because they're Methodist, and they said, Bill cheating on you, that's against your religion, that's against your church, your God. So what are you going to do about that? She's like, what are you talking about? She doesn't hand out justice. So the idea that she would stay married to him and support him still was foreign to everybody in the 90s. And if you hear Monica Lewinsky talk about it, it's sort of the same thing. So rhetoric is linked to the political because it innately lives there. And that's mostly where we talk about it. We rarely talk about the rhetoric of something from a commercial. However, it may be rhetoric. I mean, it's mass influence. It's trying to persuade you to do something. So why don't we talk about it in advertising? And the reason is because most of the time that, advertisements are not held to the standard of rhetoric. And I know you're like, there are no standards in rhetoric, but there are, and we're going to talk about those over the course of the whole semester. But advertising is about sophistry. It's about getting something done. It's a skill to get something done. That is not, by the way, a criticism. One of my best friends in the world is a very well-known and very well-paid sophist. She actually consults. She actually teaches life coaches how to talk to their clients. I mean, that's like super meta. She gets paid like $120,000 for a weekend of going in and talking to businesses about, business leaders about how to lead their people more. Like, what? Somebody pays for that? Yeah, a lot of people do, actually. She has like 3 books out, and I don't understand it. But she and I joke all the time. She also has her PhD in communication, and we both studied at the University of Oklahoma. She debated at the University of Wyoming, and so she knows, as well as I do, the difference between the rhetoric of something and the rules of rhetoric and the sophistry or the skill of practicing what people think often is rhetoric. And how do we tell the difference between those two? And I'm going to tell you the word, but don't get freaked out. The word is ethics. And I don't mean sophists are bad and rhetoricians are good. I mean that there is a difference, because I'm telling you right now, any rhetorician can practice sophistry. All right. Any of us can do it. Most of us choose not to because we're teaching. So, we're trying to teach you the right way to do something rather than the quick way. So advertisement is driven for results. So are sophists, right? Sophists, as they exist now and as they existed back then, have the same job. Their jobs were to, one, teach you how to get out of a problem, one situation, how to get out of that problem. Or you paid them to speak for you. So who does this sound like? That's right, teachers and lawyers. And the problem with the teaching was that they only taught you how to get out of that one situation. So like if you had to go to court to talk about one thing and you had to go to court, I don't know, like a year and a half later for something different, you would have to go back and rehire a sophist to help you because they only taught you how to get out of the first situation, not how to work with the second situation. So it was just a money thing, really, for them, which can't blame them. They're looking for a result, a specific result. Rhetoricians are mostly talking about a process, right? Like, how is it that I build a reasoned argument for you to buy something, or for you to do something, or for you to believe in a policy, or vote for me, or whatever it is I'm trying to convince you of? Because in advertising, it's pretty easy. In campaigns like that, it's pretty easy. Like Nike, Just Do It was the simplest commercial. Everybody uses it as the prime example. Just do what? And there was another one. Was it Nike that did it? It was all of these different sports figures. I remember Bo Jackson being probably the prime one because he played football and basketball, if I remember correctly, or football and baseball, maybe. Anyway, he played two sports. And so they'd be like, Bo knows sports, Bo knows baseball, Bo knows football, Bo knows to wear his Nikes, or something, whatever it was. I mean, it was a really popular campaign because it relied on, again, that short, very simple phrase of knowing that you're doing the right thing if you buy these shoes or buy this product. And then the second thing, which is pretty uncomplicated as well, which is getting a celebrity or someone who has the credibility because, I mean, he played sports. And he did well. So it wasn't like Michael Jordan in baseball. Look that up someday. Or Tim Tebow, whoever else tried baseball. It's like, if you fail in football, that doesn't mean you can be a baseball player or anything else, right? Like these sports are specific. So if you have somebody who can excel, at two sports at the same time at the national levels, that's pretty impressive. I don't even question that. That is good stuff right there. Good for you. That's a lot of credibility to have. So they rely on the celebrity, but the celebrity has credibility. You're going to believe them. And then a short, very simple, if you know sports, you have to buy these things. Now, there's not a whole lot of reasoning going on there. Because just because I put on a certain pair of shoes doesn't mean I'm going to be able to jump like Jordan or be able to run like Bo or, and now that I'm thinking about his name, maybe I have the wrong name on that guy, but I know the first name is Bo. So I'll have to look that up later. That's ridiculous. It's kind of like when you're younger and you look at something, for example, like clothing. You see it on a model or you see it online and you think, oh my God, that is so cute. So you get it home and you put it on and you're like, what the hell? This doesn't look anything like what it looked like in the store, right? That's because I'm not a model. So it doesn't look the same on me as it does on a model or on a mannequin or even online, right? It just doesn't look the same because it's not me. But we think, okay, we're going to look really good. We're going to look really confident. We're going to look really smart, or we're going to look really pretty or really handsome or really whatever adjective you want to put in there. If I wear these clothes, if I buy this brand. One of my favorites right now is Kate Hudson. Now, I don't watch a lot of TV. We don't have cable. I watch YouTube. And that's where I get a lot of my news. And well, I have a couple of news streaming stations, but for the most part, I use YouTube. And there's a commercial that's coming on. It's very repetitive to get commercials. If you watch YouTube, the commercials are the same all the time. They just repeat them for the most part. One of them is Kate Hudson walking around in these new Fabletics clothing line that they have. And I'm not going to lie, she looks amazing. but she always looks amazing, right? And there are these tight fitting clothes, and there's like short tops and, long stretch pants or long, I don't know what you guys call them, tights. I think that's what you guys call them now instead of stretch pants. Um, that hug your legs and everything. And that's fantastic for someone who has the body of Kate Hudson. Thank God I'm old enough to know I don't. So I'm not going to wear any of the things that I see her wearing because I know I don't look like that. Right. And that's been the push for people to put more realistic things on television for advertisements because they started to lose people. Right? Like if you go to the store constantly and your size means that this doesn't look right on you, you're going to stop buying it. I mean, Victoria's Secret is a prime example of that. So what they're doing now is, Dove started a campaign. There have been several other campaigns to show natural women, meaning that women who, aren't airbrushed or aren't like paid to look pretty, which you are. If you ever want to know about that, by the way, listen to Scarlett Johansson talk about the diet she has to be on to be in Marvel movies. It's ludicrous. And I mean, you're talking about someone who's just drop dead gorgeous, right? I mean, I think most people can agree she's attractive, and yet she's talking about the struggle of I'm sick of eating chicken and salads. That's the only thing I'm allowed to have. My goodness, if my multi-million dollar contract depended on that, I'd fail miserably. I've got chocolate in my cabinet right now, right? So and plus I like burgers sometimes, right? Or spaghetti. So there's an insanity. It's not insanity. It's not reasonable. Okay. And some people mix those two things up. People are like, you'd be crazy if you went and bought that, like a Bulgari watch or a Piaget watch, or I still don't understand people who pay like way too much for cars. I mean, unless it's a 67 Impala, I am not interested in paying a lot of money for a car. Like if I'm going to pay a ton of money, it's not going to be for some fancy sports car. It's going to be for something that I love and I want to work on, and I really, really appreciate. But some people just go out and buy sports cars. I know several people like this actually, and it's like, what? Great. I drive an Altima. I'm okay with that. It's a good, reliable vehicle. I'm sticking with it. So it's like, it's all about our preferences. But the one thing that we've had a disjunct with in advertising, particularly in sophistry, is that disconnect between what it's going to be like when you obtain the thing that you're trying to obtain. It's going to be like this. So therefore, I'm going to look like that. I'm going to look like Kate Hudson. Let's just start with the top, right? Let's just start with the hair. That's not happening. Do I grow hair if I wear Fabletics? Don't think so. Do I suddenly become skinny? No, that's never been the case for me. Once I turned about 12, I was done for. So, there's so many disconnects that are really just bad reasoning. I look at that, I see Kate Hudson, I say I want to look like Kate Hudson. So I buy that object. I buy that clothing. I don't look like Kate Hudson. Well, it's unreasonable to think that I would. So when we talk about practicing rhetoric, we're talking not about illogical or unreasonable jumps from one thing to another just so that we'll buy a product, right? Because the thing about PR campaigns is in advertising campaigns is that they're looking just to move the needle a little bit, right? They just need to grab a piece of market share. That's all they need. Well, people try to talk about politics like that, or try to talk about democracy like that, or talk about rhetoric like that, and that's just not what it's used for. There's a lot longer process that requires reasoning, that requires that you demonstrate that reasoning, which is why some people just get so frustrated when I say, well, why? Why do you think that? That's not a criticism of, well, I completely disagree, so I'm going to ask why. That's just me saying, hey, what is your reasoning? How did you come to this conclusion? Deduction, induction, pick one. I don't care which one. So when we start off with the sophists, I don't want you to think that it's because they weren't smart enough to know what rhetoric was. In fact, Gorgias in the Encodium on Helen, he specifically says that he is practicing rhetoric and that it is enjoyable. At the end of the Encodium on Helen, he says in what they call a postscript. No, that's not what I was looking for. Epilogue. In that last paragraph, I believe, the last two paragraphs, he says that he is writing this, and even if nobody believes him, even if nobody agrees, it's okay because he enjoyed writing it or speaking it at the time. So we really have to consider that, which is one of the reasons why I have you read an Encodium on Helen. Now, an Encodium is generally speaking a eulogy, okay? But it might go a little bit further than that in that it's a eulogy that is supposed to create a long-lasting memory of the person. It's sort of creating their immortality. Who is Helen? Well, she's Helen of Troy. It used to be that people used to take philosophy and, Greek myth, and they would know what I was talking about. But I can't assume that too much anymore, so please forgive me if you feel like I'm talking down to you. But there's old stories, right, about the Trojan War. You've heard about the Trojan horse. And a lot of people blame the lips that sunk 100 ships, I believe is the way that she's talked about. The greatest beauty ever, Helen of Troy. That's the way she's perceived. And then everybody was blaming her for the war. It's her fault. We got into, I don't know why. Of course I know why. Because women were blamed for everything that we couldn't figure out, especially a long time ago. And we're talking 500 BCE, maybe earlier. I don't remember when Gorgias wrote. I'm not sure we're positive. But what we do know is that this is the first time we get someone who identifies that they are practicing and engaging rhetoric. He wants to change the perception about Helen. He wants to convince us not to feel like she actually is to blame for the war. So he gives all these explanations of why she might not be to blame. He talks about she was, persuaded by, I'm going to forget his name. Who was the prince? Oh, that's terrible. Orlando Bloom played him in the movie. There you go. See, that's how I remember this. Paris, his name's Paris, that he tricked her into going with him. And that's why the war started. That she was so persuaded by love that she went, and this is one of my favorites, she just wasn't smart enough to know that she was being tricked. Okay, that one I gotta disagree with, but whatever. It's fine. The point of his story is not to find the reasons why we blame Helen so much as to change the fact that we do. He wants people to start thinking about Helen not as someone who started the war, but as this beauty who I guess was kind of a victim of circumstance in a lot of ways. And so that's why at the end of it, he says, even if you don't agree with me, I really enjoyed writing this. And I sort of thought about that a lot when I first encountered Gorgias, because I feel that way a lot of times when I have to give a speech. Particularly when I gave my dad's eulogy, I was writing it and I was still writing it up until pretty much the moment I had to get up and speak. And my mom's like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be ready for this. And you're a professional. What are you doing? And I said, I'm enjoying writing this way too much. That I can't, I need to cut some of it. It's way too long. It's not adhering to what a eulogy is supposed to do. I gotta stop telling stories about my father. I'm enjoying this memory of him. I'm enjoying the idea that I can help people remember him a certain way. That sounds nutty, but it's actually, it makes sense. And some people will tell you they love speaking, right? They love that moment when you get the audience to turn to your side, when you just know they're riled up, when you said something that really resonates with the audience, it feels really good. And so there's a certain joy that comes out of the practice of rhetoric, whether it's in the writing and the process of making an argument, or whether it's in the process of delivering it. This is true if you talk to speechwriters, if you talk to people who give speeches a lot. One of those two things are their love. And my goal in life was to be a speechwriter in the White House. But I went to DC for a summer to start working, and I was like, no, I can't do it. I need to move somewhere else. Now, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It wasn't the city. In fact, the city is beautiful. I go back to DC as often as I possibly can, but I just couldn't live there. It seemed like the days went a lot faster than they do in other parts of the country. So I chose not to do that, although it would have been a lot of fun. I could have been the Rob Lowe from West Wing or the Jon Favreau for Obama. Take your pick. I wanted to do that, but this works out because instead of writing speeches and taking a situation and analyzing it quickly and thinking of the right thing to say, I get to teach you guys how to do that, guys and gals and non-binaries. I get to teach you that. I get to teach you about the process of enjoying creating that message for an audience. And that's what Gorgias is really talking about. So Gorgias is our introduction to rhetoric in the chronological sense. He is used as the example of the first practice. And so he is, in fact, he was a sophist. He's considered a sophist, not a rhetorician, because he doesn't talk about like theory and how things should work. He talks about here's how you do it. And actually he just kind of does it. So, less explanation, more just example, I guess. But then we move on to a better known sophist, and that would be Isocrates. And I want to be clear that this is not Socrates. This is Isocrates. I don't even talk about Socrates. One of the reasons why I don't talk about Socrates is because he didn't comment on rhetoric. I mean, he has a lot to say about a lot of things. And he's very wise, but he's not the one we're interested in. That's not the subject matter we're interested in. We are interested in Isocrates, who basically was a contemporary of Plato. So Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle. Isocrates and Plato were kind of like in the same class, if you want to look at it that way, like graduated the same year. However you want to look at it, they were contemporaries. And of course, Plato was like, Isocrates is the reason. I mean, he didn't name him, but he basically says it's what people like Isocrates do that makes sophists terrible. That's why sophistry is bad. Rhetoric is bad because it's just sophistry. And Isocrates was a practicing sophist for a long time. And then at some point he saw the light and he started his own school for rhetoric. And he did it very differently. And some of the things that Isocrates did differently was, one, he didn't charge nearly as much as the sophists did. He charged educational prices, not commercial prices. And if you want to know what that looks like, I make about $75,000 a year if I work through the summer. If I don't, I'm looking at like 62, right? Which sounds really large until you realize I owe $150,000 in student loans. But it's a good living. My friend makes $120,000 in a weekend. Yeah. She really needs to just sponsor my life, right? I mean, I'm educating the youth and the future. She's just out there placating to the masses, right? She's about corporate and commercial. And I'm like, no, I'm about education. They need to learn something. And that's where Isocrates was. He was initially my friend, and then he turned into someone more like me, where money wasn't what was important. What was important was that people were able to participate in their own government, their own life. I mean, remember that governing bodies do affect you. We don't think they do, but I mean, Jefferson City is a mess, people. Just so you know, I mean, I don't care. It does not matter what side you're on. It does not matter. It's a mess. There's terrible Democrats, terrible Republicans, terrible everybody. There's some really good ones on both sides, but it's just a mess. So they can't ever really get together because it's not politics that's the problem. It's the people who aren't listening to their constituents or aren't representing the majority of their constituents. Now, if you get duly elected, I get it. I tell that to my representative all the time. My state representative is Jared Taylor. He's the one who always likes to put, let's have guns everywhere, including children's hospitals and classrooms, and everybody has to allow guns to be everywhere. That every year he puts that up. So far, it has not made it anywhere, but our gun laws are so loose that Texas is jealous of us. Okay, I mean, Missouri gun laws are so loose, and that's okay if you have reasonable people who are making good, reasonable choices all the time. And I think that one thing that all people agree on when it comes to guns is that there are unreasonable people out there. The question of where do we draw those lines? Who do we limit? Do we limit? Do we restrict? How do we do that? And here's all I got to say about it. For me, it comes down to, I don't want a gun in my classroom because it might go off and hurt me or somebody I care about. Okay? I don't want a gun in my classroom. I've never seen a need for a gun in my classroom. I've had several guys and one young lady who came up to me and said, but I always carry my gun and I feel naked without it. Sorry to hear that. I'd prefer not to have it in my classroom. And at that time, I was able to say, no, you can't bring it in here. I don't know that I can say that anymore. I don't remember what the law is now. Luckily, I'm teaching in my house, so there's no guns here. However, I want my very, very fresh venison jerky. So someone has to shoot the deer. You know what I mean? It's not going to be me, but someone has to shoot the deer. So what I'm trying to express here is that there are always middle grounds and gray areas and lines that we're trying to define. Sophists don't care about that, but rhetoricians do because it impacts everyone, right? I mean, if they made a law that guns could go anywhere, everywhere, anytime, anywhere, whatever, there's no restrictions. You can't say, I don't want your gun in my house. People could just bring it in. It wouldn't go that far. I would hope not. But you could bring it into your classroom because even though there's other, I don't know, 6th graders in there, other adults in there, other teenagers in there, even though that's the case, the teachers can have a gun. In college, the students can have a gun. Is that really where it's necessary? Because at that point, I'm no longer able to teach you the way I'm supposed to be able to teach you. Why? Because what is the biggest difference between coercion and persuasion? The answer is whether or not you have to say something or curb your speech because you're fearful, right? Somebody puts a gun to your head, you're fearful. All the same, someone brings a gun into a place where you're having a discussion where people take risks when they communicate, because every communication is a risk. But when you're talking about politics or religion or sex or abortion or any of those other things, it can get pretty controversial. So what if I say something that somebody doesn't like and the gun gets pulled? Would that be unreasonable? Absolutely. Would I expect it? No, of course not. I don't expect it to happen. But I also don't want to have to plan for the contingency that it might, right? Plus, I'm not going to say anything controversial at that point. I'm going to be like, dude, how vanilla can I make this lecture? How do I make rhetoric non-controversial? By the way, that's pretty much impossible. So I don't know how much I'd be able to teach anymore, right? Because there's a fear there or a restriction there, not that somebody's going to shoot you, but that if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person on the wrong day, that they could hurt themselves or somebody else, including you. So there's a fear that comes along with that. But apparently, Mr. Taylor does not see it that way. Well, clearly in my district that elected Mr. Taylor, Jared, I'm on a first name basis with the guy. So the people who elected him. They like what he's doing, right? My dissenting opinion is irrelevant. I always appeal to his better angel inside him or whatever. I'm always looking for that thing that's going to get him to understand that guns in schools is a bad idea. Now, I mean, forget college. Like, we can skip that discussion for a second because that's a more difficult argument to have, debate to have. When I say argument, by the way, I'm not talking about angry argument. I'm talking about a debate of ideas, reasonable. I'm not gonna try to have an argument about whether or not guns should be in college classrooms. Let's do something easier. How could anybody think it's a good idea to have a classroom full of, I don't know. I mean, my God, my daughter's 12. I mean, they're disasters at 12. They're disasters from boys are disasters from the time they're like 10 until they're 21 or 22. Girls are disasters from the time that they're like 9 to 11 and then forever. They're just messes. I've raised a boy and I'm in the middle of raising a girl. I got to tell you, they are nutty when they're that age. They're not reasonable. So while we got in trouble for chewing gum in school, I wouldn't want somebody getting in trouble because they were playing with the teacher's gun. And anybody who thinks that's unreasonable has never been in a classroom with that many 12-year-olds, because believe me, these things can happen. I mean, so I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other on that debate. What I'm trying to say is that instead of appealing to Jared Taylor not representing his people, because obviously he is, I've got to work it a different way. I've got to say it a different way. Now, do I think he's actually representing everybody? No, because there's less than 30% of registered voters who vote in these elections in my district. The Springfield district's a little bit different, but here it's ridiculous. It's the same people voting for the same people all the time. So for me, it's like, well, there's got to be other people out there like me. And chances are good they're not voting because they feel like it's worthless, that there's no reason to. And they may be right, by the way. They may be right. The numbers suggest they're right. If you just look at the raw data of Republicans and Democrats and assume everybody votes party, Jared Taylor will win every single time. But what if? What if there's enough registered voters to potentially challenge him and they're just not voting, right? That's the question we always have to ask. But the other question we always have to ask is there any way I can appeal to my audience to get them to consider something different, to think about something differently? I'm not going to ever convince someone who is 100% against abortion to become, an advocate for women's rights. That's never going to happen. Not in a short period of time, at the very least. But maybe we can move the dial a little bit, get them to consider situations where it might be necessary. Or if you're on the other side, you're never going to convince somebody who is 100%, not pro-abortion, but pro-choice, giving women the right to choose. You're never going to take them from there to there should be no right to choose whether or not you have an abortion or not. You're told. You're never going to get them there. But you might be able to move the needle a little bit. You might be able to get them to consider more often than not that, protecting a baby is more important than a woman's choice. You might in certain situations. So that's all we're trying to do in persuasion, right? Not coerce and persuade. Now, when we get into how do we persuade, What tools do we use? As I told you, in PR campaigns, in advertising campaigns, in the short-term market share grabbing world that we live in, it's all about just persuading. What's the shortest distance between me and going to Mama Jean's to buy healthy food? What's the shortest distance between those two things? Whatever that is, I'm going to figure it out, and then I'm going to advertise that to myself, right? That's how that works. It's a little bit different when we're talking about public policy, when we're talking about public discourse, when we're talking about things that are moral in nature, but yet are being made into policy. That things get really messy there. And a lot of times people tend to think that public policy has nothing to do with them. But it does. It impacts your everyday. I mean, I remember one time I didn't go to a city council meeting. Was it a city council meeting, or I don't remember what it was, but it was a meeting for how to use some land. And I was like, I'm not going to go to that. Yeah, I should have, because a year later, I'm driving onto campus and I'm going to go my usual way, and I can't, because now there's a green space blocking me. So I have to drive all the way around. And where I'm talking about is in the parking lot across from Craig Hall, King Street, or King Street, goes right into the parking lot. And it used to be that you could go straight through there into the neighborhood. And it's been a while now. It's probably been a decade now. They blocked that off. They put a green patch there, and they put a bike path there, and no cars can get through anymore. That was a real change for me. And I was like, oh my God, it's that one meeting I decided not to go to. I should have been paying attention. And I have been mad at myself for 10 years about that particular situation. It's silly, but I probably wouldn't have made much of a difference, but I could have spoken my mind. And as we know, if I speak my mind, even if it doesn't go my way, I'm happy. I'm happier. I apologize. I'm diabetic, and my pump keeps going off for some reason because it's telling me that I'm heading into a sugar low, but I just ate lunch, so I know that's not happening. So I apologize for the beeping. If you're diabetic, you understand what I'm going through. If you're not, just trust me. It's a pain in the butt. So the idea that I'd be heard is what's important, which is why they have those big community meetings, which is why town halls are important, which is why the president has town halls, why the president meets with students, why the president comes to convocation and to graduation and to all of that stuff, right? Because we want to hear him tell us what we want to hear, whatever that is, right? We want to hear something from them. So in antidosis, which you can probably figure out means like antidote, right? Like he's trying to stave off some arguments. He's trying to stave off criticisms of him. What were those criticisms? Well, Isocrates went from being a sophist to practicing rhetoric and teaching rhetoric. And so he took a big dive in his pay. Huge pay cut. I really should go corporate just for the heck of it, but huge pay cut to go into the educational area. That's always been true. He also now is no longer hiring himself out to represent others. He's only teaching people. The third thing is it takes a lot longer to teach people rhetoric than it does to teach them sophistry. And so he's accused of not spending the money necessary to build a ship or a building or contribute to the community in some way. And he should, because he has all this money, because he's rich, obviously. He was a sophist. Now he's a teacher. He's obviously rich. He should have enough money to do this, and he's supposed to do it. That's what everybody else does. Except he didn't, right? And they also accused him of the same thing they accused Socrates of, which was essentially corrupting the youth, which is a nice way of saying that he was trying to empower people that they didn't want empowered. I mean, There's a reason why college costs so much money. It's because they used to limit who could go to college. Now it's like, if you don't go to college, you don't have a degree, you're screwed. It's like, wow, how did we get there? How did we get to that place where it's now the requirement? I mean, when do we get to be selective? Aren't they supposed to be teaching this stuff in high school? And high schools are like, yeah, we're free. That's why we suck. No, that's not the way it's supposed to work. Everybody's underpaid. All the money's going to the wrong places. Me. No, just kidding. I'm fine. So the idea that he had the money and that he was trying to empower people that shouldn't be empowered. He was accused of those two things. And so he had to defend himself, he felt, because it was in the public sphere that this was happening. If you want to think about it this way, if you've ever seen like a celebrity or someone who's semi-famous, I mean, they're really not celebrities. They're just known. I mean, is a TikTok star a celebrity? I mean, I don't get it. Someone who is popular, they know that there's going to be something coming out about them that's negative. They're hearing it. They're hearing people say, oh, Scarlett Johansson complains about the diet she has to use for when she's in a Marvel movie. Well, of course she does. I would too. But let's say that she needed to get ahead of that, right? So she might be like, oh, that's coming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a post talking about what great food I've been able to create with a salad and chicken, and teach people how I'm doing it. I'm going to put a positive spin on it. I'm going to not apologize for it, because there's no reason to apologize, right? Or like when I've been watching way too much Marvel lately. Who was it? The Hulk. Can't think of his name. Mark Ruffalo. When Mark Ruffalo gave away the ending of Endgame, or of Infinity War, excuse me. I mean, just told everybody what it was. I mean, it's just like, what? Totally violates the contract, the whole deal. And he immediately had to do some kind of press for that. He had to answer for that, right? So that's where Isocrates is. He's realizing that these people are going to attack him, and that he's no longer going to have any ability to defend himself once he's dead. So he writes this and says, look, I don't have as much money as you seem to think I do. Let's just start there. By the way, that's true of most professors and teachers in this world. They don't have what you think they do. Administrators, different story. But for the faculty, you're looking at a pretty average life, a good life, but an average one. Nothing exceptional. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I am giving back to the community. And the way that I'm giving back to the community, the way I'm perpetuating my immortality, is not through a building or through a ship or through a library or whatever. It's through what I give my students. They are going to continue to live on and share and do what needs to be done because I taught them well. And so antidosis is put out there as a way to answer the critics before the critics can really come in. But at that point, there were whispers. And was he successful? I'll leave that to you. You tell me, was he successful? The second piece that you read, Against the Sophists, I think it's probably pretty obvious. It's a piece about why the sophists are bad. I don't think it's that hard. And if you read through it, even just the introduction to Isocrates, they tell you, all the reasons why sophists are bad, and they're mostly for the reasons that I listed. But he has a real problem with the ethics of sophists, the fact that they charge all that money to get people through one situation, and they don't even bother teaching them about the process and how to do it. They just teach them what to do. So they tell people what to do. They don't teach them how to do it. And that's one of his biggest complaints, because he believes that the better nature is to give students a way of living in the world that they can reproduce, that they can hand down, so that someday, in 2021, I can tell you This is the process that you need to go through. And maybe if we go through that, we'll stop having so much anger and so much division, right? I mean, can we just give it a shot? There was a time in this country when I did not feel like walking outside was dangerous. I mean, I don't feel that it's dangerous now, but I do watch what I say a lot more than I used to, because I'm not allowed to have an opinion either. I could lose my job, right? So, but I have opinions and I share them. And I don't share them in the classroom too often, but if you knew where I lived and you drove past my house, you would see that I have a Pittsburgh Steelers sign out there. And during political campaigns, when it's appropriate, I will have a political campaign sign out there. Most of the time, it's Democrat. Not always, but most of the time, it's a Democrat. I tell people all the time, if Sarah Palin was not picked by the McCain team, I would have voted for John McCain. Really love that guy. I miss him a great deal. In fact, I miss his voice. I miss a lot of voices in Congress right now of the reasonable people who are trying not to just water everything down, but to say, hey, we can work this out. We really can. Maybe I'm not going to be happy at the end of it. Maybe you're not going to be happy at the end of it, but we can work it out so that we're not so divided. So we're not accusing each other of canceling each other, so that we're not ignoring each other, and we're not basically treating each other in terrible, disrespectful ways. We're listening. So I don't know how that's going to read to you guys. I don't know how you're going to receive that, but it's a message that, we didn't used to have to give all that much. People knew that. There was a such thing as bipartisanship and reaching across the aisle that did not involve ridiculous trade-offs. And by the way, I blame everybody in Congress for that, not one side or the other. It's a mess. And I'm not talking about Jefferson City at this point. I'm talking about DC. But, everything flows from the top. So that's a problem that we need to work on. What can we do? I can help you understand why people get into those kinds of disagreements and how it impacts our public policy. You can probably see that already. You don't need me to tell you. But I can also tell you how we can start to rectify the situation. And that's where rhetoric differs from persuasion. I'm not going to tell you what to do, what to think, who to vote for, nothing like that. But I am going to help you understand how to critically think about what messages you're receiving and what impacts those might have by considering all the means of persuasion in any given situation. My job is to teach you that skill of understanding all the means of persuasion in any given situation. All right. So I'll leave you with that for the last week. Now, what you're about to read, as I previewed earlier, is interesting, but Phaedrus is hard to get through because it's a dialogue. I hate reading plays. I hate reading dialogues. And what's even more confusing is that Plato uses the name Socrates as his voice in this dialogue. So there's three main players that you need to worry about. You need to worry about Socrates, which is Plato's voice, which means Socrates is always going to win every argument. You have Phaedrus, who is a student of Socrates. And Phaedrus just watched a speech by Lysias. And Lysias is considered to be a really good speaker. And so Phaedrus goes and he listens to this speech by Lysias and comes back to Plato and says, I have to tell you what happened. And then he demonstrates it. And Plato says, let me tell you why that's bad. And then Plato demonstrates it. I think you're going to hear the speech, or read the speech, I should say, like 2.5 times in this reading. And the goal of that is to show you how rhetoric can be used for bad things, to bad end goals. Okay. So, man, I am so sorry about that. So what we need to do is go into it understanding that we're not going to understand everything, that there are times when it seems like Socrates is talking us into a circle, and start to identify, though, what are his main arguments for why rhetoric is bad. And there is a point where he starts arguing that rhetoric is good. Do not be confused. That is not Plato saying, oh, I changed my mind, rhetoric is okay. That is Plato demonstrating how he can use rhetoric, although he doesn't use it appropriately, but how he can use rhetoric to persuade you that rhetoric is good and bad at the same time. And that's one of his criticisms, is that rhetoric can force you to understand that the same thing that you just argued was good is also bad. And this is that double speak, that double talk that people always say they hate out of politicians. And so we can discuss this, but that is one of the reasons why Plato hates rhetoric. I'll leave it to you to find the other ones. The second thing that you're going to be trudging through, as I said, it's not a play or a dialogue. It's a handbook. It's like reading another textbook. But it's important. Now, here's the better news. It is organized extremely well. So you're going to know what you're looking for. And I can tell you right now, some things you're going to want to look for that I'm going to talk about next week is ethos, pathos, and logos, artificial proofs, which are the artificial proofs, inartificial proofs, or artistic and inartistic. I don't remember which words your book uses. They're the same. They're interchangeable there. You need to pay attention to the genres of rhetoric. You need to pay attention, genre, G-E-N-R-E, just in case you're looking for it. It doesn't sound like it looks. You also need to pay attention to what Aristotle says about content. And what I mean by content is it's not just about establishing credibility. It's not just about being organized. It's about laying out your argument in a way that makes sense. Pay attention to the syllogism, which is under deductive reasoning. Understand what inductive and deductive reasoning is. If there's a lot of work about topoi, T-O-P-O-I, breeze through that, skim it, okay? But the rest of it, look at it. I mean, at least go through the heading and see if you can find where they talk about it in the actual, where he talks about it in the actual text. The introduction to that work will be very helpful to you. The introduction to Aristotle will be very helpful to you in figuring that out. But those are some things that you should probably look for. And obviously the definition of rhetoric. And he compares it to cookery at one point. And so that's sort of fun and interesting to read. But Phaedrus also has an underlying thing. In Phaedrus, I always question whether I should tell you this from the get-go or whether I should let you figure it out, but I think I'll just say it from the get-go. Plato is also trying to seduce Phaedrus. He's interested in Phaedrus. And the topic they're debating, because Lysias was giving a speech about it, was whether you should learn from someone you love or someone that you don't love. It's a very interesting thing, but as Plato is doing this, he's attempting to prove why he's better than Lysias and why rhetoric is bad and why Lysias should want to, be with him and learn from him and everything else. So there's that underlying soap opera plot if you're looking for a little bit of entertainment. It's not going to be strictly obvious, but it's kind of interesting when you go back. Well, I mean, I've read this thing like 30 times, right, in my life. But when I went back knowing that he was doing that, once I figured that out, I was like, man, this is a lot more interesting. So I'll give you that. Hopefully that helps a little bit, but I'll be honest with you, this stuff will put you to sleep. It's going to take you a little while to get through it, but these are the foundational, most important pieces that we could be reading. Why rhetoric is bad, why rhetoric is good. Plato's going to say it's bad and give you reasons. Aristotle's going to say it's good and here's how you do it. Okay, here's the things that you need to look for. So hopefully that helps you. Hopefully this hour-long video, I know I went off topic a couple times, but hopefully it demonstrated something to you. And if you have any questions, of course, always put them up on the discussion board or text me, or I mean, you can email, but I'm not really good with email. If you do email, send me a text and tell me to check my email. Some of you are probably thinking, oh no, you're really good at that because, I saw it pop up and I immediately answered, but I'm not always that good, and especially over the weekend. But again, any questions, just let me know. We start off slow in this class because these readings are so difficult, but you're going to make it. All right, let's just get through these first few, and I promise you it's going to get a heck of a lot more interesting sooner rather than later. All right, everybody, you take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and I will see you next week. Well, you'll see me. Talk to you soon.